Welcome back to Reddit Revenge. Today's tale starts right now. I have no idea who you are. That was the sentence that cut through the laughter and music at our 25th high school reunion. The barn was full of old classmates catching up, spouses trading stories, kids running around the yard. But in that single moment, the entire place went quiet. A man who had spent years making himself the center of attention suddenly stood frozen, as if the floor had been ripped out beneath him. And the person delivering those words, my best friend John, calm, steady, and deliberate, as though he'd been waiting decades for this exact opportunity. To understand why that moment landed like a hammer, you need to know the history. John and I went to a small college prep school, just 72 kids in our graduating class. Small enough that everyone knew everyone. Small enough that cliques barely existed. For the most part, high school was fine. Except for one guy, Tom. He wasn't a full-blown bully, not in the traditional sense, but he was relentless. He lived for cheap laughs at other people's expense, especially when it came to targeting the smarter kids like John and me. Tom's pranks weren't clever, they were cruel. He once spread a rumor that John had kissed a girl who was openly gay, just to humiliate them both. Another time, he printed fake invitations to a party at my parents' house, passing them around school so people would show up to a house party that never existed. That was his style. Cheap shots, no creativity, and no remorse. For us, high school was a place to learn and survive. For him, it was a stage and we were his punchlines. High school eventually ended, but life had very different plans for John and Tom. John, who had once been the quiet target of Tom's endless jokes, dove headfirst into building a real future for himself. He went to college, worked late nights, and built connections the honest way. In his late 20s, John founded a small company almost no one believed in at the start. He poured his energy into it, often sleeping in his office, sacrificing vacations, and betting everything he had. It wasn't instant success. There were years of struggle, near bankruptcy, and moments when giving up would have been the easiest path. But John kept pushing. Slowly, his company grew from a risky startup into something that had a real impact on the local economy. By his mid-30s, John wasn't just running a business, he was shaping the community. He raised money for local charities, funded scholarships, and even spearheaded the construction of a brand new STEM center for several schools in the area, including our old high school. His name, once laughed at by people like Tom, was now literally carved into the side of a building as a symbol of opportunity for future students. That kind of success could have turned anyone arrogant, but John stayed grounded. He knew where he came from, and he never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated. Tom, on the other hand, followed a very different road. After graduation, he didn't settle into any one career or path. He chased flashes of success that fizzled out almost as quickly as they appeared. In the early 2000s, when social media was just beginning to take off, Tom rebranded himself as a white rapper/DJ. He posted flashy pictures, staged music videos with rented cars, and bragged about big deals that never quite materialized. When that dream inevitably fell apart, he slid into used car sales, where his slick talk worked for a while, but his habit of overselling and under-delivering caught up with him quickly. Soon, he was gone from that world too. By his 30s, Tom was dabbling in real estate. On the surface, it looked like he was moving up. Suits, big claims about investments, posts showing him shaking hands in front of houses. But if you scratched even a little below the surface, it was obvious he was wrapped up in schemes that sounded suspiciously like mortgage fraud. I work in construction and real estate myself, and it didn't take much to recognize the smell of something rotten. He bragged constantly online about opportunities and big wins, but it was smoke and mirrors. When that fell apart, he jumped again, this time into an investment group that sounded like private equity but looked more like a pyramid scheme dressed up in corporate jargon. And when crypto started booming, of course Tom reinvented himself again as a crypto guru. He filled his feeds with motivational quotes, staged photos of him on laptops at coffee shops, and bold claims that he could make anyone rich if they just paid for his insider program. He even slid into my DMs several times pitching me life-changing opportunities. I never responded. By now, his pattern was clear. Tom wasn't chasing success. He was chasing attention. Years rolled on, and for the most part, Tom's antics became background noise. Social media made it impossible not to see him popping up every few months with a new hustle, a new scheme, or a new once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Meanwhile, John and I were too busy building real, lasting lives, careers, families, and friendships that actually meant something. Every now and then, one of us would get a laugh out of seeing Tom's latest rebrand, but mostly we just ignored him. Then came the news that changed everything. Our high school was organizing a 25th class reunion over Labor Day weekend. The announcement hit my inbox, and I immediately thought about who might show up. Our school was small, just 72 of us in the graduating class, so every name carried a weight of familiarity. Some people I genuinely wanted to see again, others not so much. And of course, my mind wandered to one person in particular, Tom. The reunion was a big deal because we hadn't managed to put one together since our awkward 5-year attempt, which had been sparsely attended. This time, however, there was momentum. A few classmates had taken charge, secured venues, and even organized multiple events across the weekend. John, being who he is, offered to host one of the main gatherings at his property. He had this beautiful house with a renovated barn and acres of land, perfect for a relaxed evening of food, drinks, and catching up. As soon as I heard John was opening his home, I knew it would be something special. He wasn't one for ego-driven displays, but the setting itself was a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. I could already imagine Tom showing up, desperate to flash his newest success in John's direction, hoping to latch onto his spotlight. The thought alone made me chuckle. This reunion wasn't just going to be about nostalgia. It was going to be about seeing who we'd all become, and for some, who they never stopped being. The night of the reunion arrived, and John's property looked like something out of a magazine spread. His house sat on several acres, with a wide driveway lined by lanterns and a massive barn that had been renovated into an event space. String lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow, and music drifted softly from speakers hidden in the rafters. Tables were set up outside, and families mingled while kids ran across the lawn, laughing and chasing fireflies. About 50 classmates showed up, many with spouses and even children in tow. It felt surreal to see familiar faces aged by 25 years, some barely changed, others almost unrecognizable. The small size of our graduating class gave the whole event an intimate feel, as if we'd all stepped back into a slightly older, more weathered version of high school. John and I, along with our spouses and a few close friends, camped out on a side patio with comfortable chairs and a cooler stocked with drinks. We didn't feel the need to make the rounds or work the crowd. People came by to say hello, and we caught up with those we genuinely wanted to see, but mostly we just enjoyed the evening together. The conversations flowed easily. Some classmates swapped stories about kids and careers. Others reminisced about sports, teachers, and old-school trips. The atmosphere was lighthearted and nostalgic, almost like a family reunion. And then, as I scanned the crowd, I spotted him, Tom, dressed in a flashy, too-tight suit jacket, a shiny watch catching the light every time he gestured, and that same self-assured swagger he'd had in high school, but now amplified by years of selling himself. He looked around the party as if he were scouting for investors rather than reconnecting with old friends. I leaned over to John and muttered, "Well, look who decided to make an entrance." John smirked, sipping his drink. "Figures. Let's see how long it takes before he tries to pitch me something." The stage was set. Tom wasted no time making his move. He strutted across the patio like he owned the place, a glass of wine sloshing dangerously in his hand. His grin was wide, rehearsed, the kind you'd see from someone trying to sell you something you didn't need. "Johnny boy," he boomed, as if they were lifelong friends. "Man, look at you. You've really made it big. Huh? Beautiful house, beautiful family, the whole package." He clapped John on the shoulder like they'd been close for decades. John stayed seated, calm as ever. He smiled politely but didn't rise. "Evening," he said evenly. "Glad you could make it." I could tell John wasn't looking forward to this interaction, but Tom plowed ahead anyway. He launched into a string of shallow compliments, barely pausing to breathe, before his real agenda slipped out. "You know, I've been following your career," Tom said, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. "You've done really well. But listen, if you want to really maximize those returns, crypto is the future. I'm telling you, I could show you how to double, maybe triple your money in no time. You'd be crazy not to at least hear me out." The way Tom leaned in, like he was offering John a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, made me want to laugh. Same old Tom, always selling something, always pretending he had the inside scoop. But John, he didn't flinch. He didn't scowl or roll his eyes. Instead, he gave a calm, measured smile, then tilted his head slightly, as if he were genuinely confused. "I'm sorry," John said, his tone polite but cutting. "Who are you here with? Is your wife one of our classmates?" The air shifted instantly. Tom froze, caught completely off guard. His mouth opened, then closed, like he couldn't quite process what he just heard. I sat back in my chair, trying not to laugh. I knew this was only the beginning. Tom blinked rapidly, his confidence faltering for the first time all evening. No, man. It's me, Tom. Tom from high school. Don't you remember? We had classes together. I was on the football team. I used to, razz you guys a bit." The way he said "res" made my stomach turn. It was his cute little way of rewriting history, pretending that years of being a jerk had just been harmless teasing. John tilted his head, looking thoughtful, but the calm smile never left his face. He said slowly. "I think I have a pretty good memory of our class, but I don't recall you at all." You could feel the silence ripple across the patio. A couple of nearby classmates looked over, sensing the tension. Tom's smug veneer was cracking. "Well, come on," Tom said with a strained laugh. "Don't play like that. You remember me. I'm unforgettable." He spread his arms wide like he was waiting for applause. Instead, John leaned back in his chair and gave a small wave toward Ashley, the event planner. "Hey, Ashley, could you come here for a moment?" Ashley hurried over, all smiles, though I could tell she already sensed the game John was playing. "Yes, Mr. Underthird." John gestured casually toward Tom. "I get approached like this a lot because of my business. I understand it, but this is my home and a private event. Could you just double-check the guest list? I want to make sure everything's in order." Tom's face flushed red. He sputtered, "Are you serious right now? You think I'm crashing your party?" Ashley's smile never faltered. "Of course not, sir. It's just a formality. Right this way, please. We'll just verify your ID against the list." And with that, she motioned him toward the driveway. Tom hesitated, glared at John, then finally stomped off with her, muttering under his breath. John calmly sipped his drink, then gave me the smallest wink. The table erupted in muffled laughter. About 20 minutes later, just when the patio had relaxed back into its easy rhythm of drinks and laughter, Tom returned. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was Karen, one of the classmates who had been heavily involved in organizing the reunion weekend. She looked mildly exasperated, but clearly felt obligated to step in. Karen approached John with a polite but slightly defensive smile. "Hey, John," she began. "I hear you said you don't remember Tom, but he was in our class for all 4 years. He played on the football team, remember?" Tom stood tall beside her, arms crossed, a smug little grin plastered on his face. He clearly thought Karen's presence would vindicate him, prove that John was being petty or rude. John looked up at them both, expression perfectly calm. He even tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely trying to recall. "I'm sorry," he said evenly, "but sometimes people just fail to leave an impression on me." The silence that followed was devastating. Karen's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while Tom's smirk instantly collapsed into something closer to a grimace. John then added, his voice warm but dismissive, "In any case, I do hope you enjoy my home and have a lovely weekend." And with that, he stood, turned to his wife and said, "Now, let's go check on the important people. We need to make sure the kids are having fun." It was a perfect closer. Polite enough not to be cruel, but sharp enough that the message landed. The kids were the important ones, not Tom. As John and his wife walked away, Tom stood frozen in place, his attempt at reclaiming dignity falling apart like sand slipping through his fingers. I caught John's eye across the lawn a few moments later, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. His text read simply, "That was fun." The moment John walked away with his wife, the patio buzzed with an energy that hadn't been there before. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath from the people who had just witnessed what happened. Some tried to act casual, sipping their drinks and turning back to side conversations. But the smirks and quick glances said everything. Tom had been publicly dismissed. Karen, clearly uncomfortable, muttered something about just wanting to clarify before awkwardly excusing herself. That left Tom standing there alone, shifting from foot to foot, red creeping up his neck. For a man who spent years branding himself as a flashy success story, this wasn't just a bruise to his ego, it was a complete unraveling. I watched as Tom tried to salvage the moment. He picked up a drink from a nearby table and attempted to strike up conversation with another group. But instead of leaning in, people leaned away. They nodded politely, gave him short responses, then turned back to each other. It was subtle, but it was happening everywhere he went, like ripples spreading across a pond. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. John, who hadn't sought the spotlight at all, had entire clusters of classmates gravitating toward him, asking about his work, his family, the STEM center. He wasn't bragging, he was listening, engaging, making people laugh. Meanwhile, Tom floated like a ghost through the party, his attempts at charm falling flat, his presence tolerated but not welcomed. I realized then that John's little line, "Sometimes people just fail to leave an impression," had done more damage than shouting or mocking ever could. It reduced Tom to exactly what he had always been, background noise. The irony? For all the years Tom spent trying to be noticed, trying to sell himself as someone important, his greatest nightmare was unfolding in real time. He wasn't feared, respected, or envied. He was being forgotten, right there in front of everyone. And John? He didn't have to lift a finger anymore. The silence, the dismissal, and the indifference were louder than any insult Tom had ever thrown at us back in high school. By the time the sun dipped low and the string lights around the patio flickered on, the reunion had fully settled into a rhythm. Groups clustered over food tables, kids darted across the lawn with sparklers, and laughter rolled through the air. Felt warm, nostalgic, almost cinematic. Everyone belonged. Everyone except Tom. He lingered on the edges, glass in hand, trying to insert himself into conversations. But the harder he pushed, the more obvious the rejection became. At one point, I caught him leaning into a circle of former classmates who were reminiscing about senior pranks. One of them, a woman who'd been cheer captain, smiled politely, then said, "Sorry, we were just in the middle of a story," and angled her body away. Tom stood there frozen, then muttered something under his breath and retreated. Meanwhile, John was in his element, but not in the way you'd think. He wasn't center stage giving speeches or flaunting wealth. Instead, he sat at a picnic table with 3 kids showing them how to roast marshmallows without burning them, laughing as one of the kids inevitably set his on fire. Parents glanced over and smiled. Whispers of, "That's just John, always the good guy," floated in the air. It was poetic. Back in high school, Tom had thrived on embarrassing others, needing attention to feel powerful. Tonight, John's greatest flex was the exact opposite: humility. And everyone saw it. The tension peaked when Tom finally circled back toward our group, trying one last time to engage. He walked up, louder than necessary, and said, "You know, I've made a lot of money this past year. Crypto's exploding and I've got people doubling their returns. If anyone wants in, I can." Before he could finish, John's wife, soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of person who rarely cuts anyone off, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Tom, this is a reunion, not a sales pitch." The words hit harder than anything John had said all night. The group fell silent. Tom's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but nothing came out. He laughed awkwardly, waved a hand and said, "Just trying to help people out." But no one responded. For the first time in decades, The self-proclaimed star of his own show was left without an audience. Tom's forced smile wavered as the silence stretched. A few seconds, maybe less, but it felt like an eternity. He gave a half-hearted chuckle, then muttered something about lightening the mood before shuffling away toward the drink table. But here's the thing, no one followed. No one called him back. Conversations that had paused resumed as though he'd never spoken at all. That was the moment it hit me. He wasn't just ignored. He was irrelevant. John leaned back in his chair, calm as ever, and whispered to me, "You don't have to destroy someone's reputation when they'll do it themselves." Then he clinked his beer bottle against mine with a grin. From where I sat, I could see Tom pacing near the barn, phone in hand, furiously texting someone. Maybe he was venting. Maybe he was posting on social media about how everyone here was fake. Either way, he wasn't part of the reunion anymore. He was just outside of it looking in. Meanwhile, John stood up and gathered a group of classmates to take a stroll around the property. He led them past the garden, showed them the barn where the kids were dancing, and even pulled out some old photos he had framed in the entryway. Laughter and genuine warmth followed him wherever he went. It was a quiet but powerful contrast. One man desperate to be remembered, and another unforgettable because of who he was, not what he bragged about. At one point, a classmate leaned over to me and whispered, "You know what's crazy? I barely remember Tom from high school either. But John, he's the kind of guy you never forget." That was it. Tom's worst nightmare, playing out in real time. Not that John hated him. Not that anyone was out for revenge. But that his name, his presence, his big personality, none of it had left a mark. And in its own subtle way, that was the harshest justice of all. It was almost comical watching Tom's last-ditch efforts. He reappeared near the center of the barn, where a group had gathered to share stories about their kids and careers. You could tell he'd worked himself up into salesman mode. His gestures grew bigger, his voice louder, his laugh just a little too forced. He started pitching himself, not literally handing out business cards, but it might as well have been. "You know, I've been killing it in crypto," he boomed. "And if anyone wants to get in on the ground floor of my next project, I can guarantee returns that'll blow your mind." Heads turned, but not the way he wanted. There wasn't curiosity or excitement in people's eyes. There was discomfort. A couple of classmates exchanged looks that said, "Is this guy serious?" One of the spouses actually rolled their eyes. John, meanwhile, stayed on the patio, completely unbothered, sipping his drink while chatting with a group of kids about their favorite video games. He didn't even glance in Tom's direction. And that made it worse because Tom wanted his attention most of all. Finally, one of the reunion organizers, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, cut him off. With a polite but firm tone, she said, "Tom, this isn't really the time for business pitches. We're here to reconnect, not invest." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom laughed awkwardly, tried to shrug it off, but the damage was done. A few people politely excused themselves from the circle, leaving him standing there with his half-empty glass and nowhere else to go. From where I sat, I caught John's eye. He gave me the smallest smile, almost like he was saying, "See? Sometimes you just let the truth do the work." Tom wasn't just being ignored anymore. He was being actively shut out. And in that moment, it was clear. His reign as the self-proclaimed big personality of our class was officially over. Once Claire shut him down, Tom seemed smaller somehow. The man who'd walked in with his chest puffed out and his voice 3 octaves louder than necessary now lingered awkwardly at the edge of conversations, searching for an opening that never came. Each time he tried to chime in, whether it was someone talking about their kids' schools or another reminiscing about the old football games, his comments fell flat. People nodded politely, then turned away, continuing as if he hadn't spoken at all. Meanwhile, the rest of the reunion had hit its stride. Someone started up music inside the barn, and a wave of laughter followed as people pulled out old high school dance moves. Couples who hadn't seen each other in decades were swapping stories. Kids were racing across the lawn with glow sticks, and John's wife was setting out trays of late-night snacks that vanished in minutes. It was striking to see the contrast. Where John moved effortlessly between groups, joking with old friends one moment, kneeling down to help a kid tie their shoelace the next. Tom was stuck in this invisible bubble of irrelevance. He hovered near the drink station, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to care, though the tension in his jaw said otherwise. At one point, I watched him glance toward John again, as if waiting for acknowledgement that never came. John, of course, was too busy laughing at a story from one of our classmates about sneaking into the gym after hours senior year. The more Tom tried to insert himself, the more the reunion seemed to move on without him. It wasn't just that John had dismissed him, it was that the entire class seemed to collectively realize. Tom had always been noise, not substance. And without his antics taking center stage, we all noticed how much better the night felt. By the time the bonfire was lit out back, Tom wasn't even part of the memory being created. He had faded like a background character in someone else's story. As the bonfire crackled and the cool night air settled in, little clusters of classmates formed around the fire pit, drinks in hand, stories rolling out smoother with every laugh. That's when I noticed something. Tom wasn't even near the circle anymore. He stood off by the barn, arms crossed, staring at his phone like it was the only friend he had left. Around the fire, though, his name came up, not in the way he probably imagined, but in hushed chuckles and sideways glances. Remember when he tried to sell us those ridiculous investment opportunities on Facebook? One classmate whispered, smirking. Another rolled her eyes. Oh yeah, he DM'd me too. Promised I'd be a millionaire in 6 months if I just wired him a starter fee. Total scam. Even the quieter folks, the ones who usually stayed out of drama, nodded knowingly. It was like the collective mask had dropped. Everyone finally admitted what we all suspected back then. Tom had always been about appearances, about making himself seem bigger than he was. And now, under the warm glow of the fire, his act didn't stand a chance. John leaned over to me at one point and muttered, just loud enough for our group to hear, "It's amazing how quickly people fade when they never built anything real." The circle chuckled, not cruelly, just knowingly. Meanwhile, the laughter kept rising, stories overlapping, old friendships rekindling like no time had passed. The kids roasted marshmallows, someone pulled out a guitar, and the whole night felt like one of those rare, golden moments where you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And Tom? He wasn't part of it. He was a silhouette in the dark, invisible in the one place he thought he'd make a grand entrance. Just when the evening seemed to settle into that perfect rhythm of laughter, music, and nostalgia, Tom decided he wasn't going to leave quietly. He suddenly marched back toward the patio, chin high, a half-empty beer in his hand. You could feel the shift in the air, like a storm cloud drifting in over an otherwise clear sky. "Hey everyone," he called out, a little too loud, a little too forced. "I just want to say, it's great seeing all my old classmates again. And, I couldn't help but notice." He gestured toward John with a sloppy grin. "Some of us have done okay. But, I've got opportunities too. Real opportunities. Crypto is the future. And if anyone here wants to double, no, triple their money." The chatter died instantly. The guitar stopped mid-strum. You could practically hear the crickets in the field beyond. Everyone's eyes flicked between John, calm as ever in his chair, and Tom, who clearly thought he was delivering some kind of victorious speech. John let the silence hang for a beat before standing up, glass of wine still in hand. He smiled politely, but his words cut sharper than anything Tom had ever thrown at him in high school. "Tom," John said evenly, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but tonight isn't about money. It's not about business. It's about people, our classmates, our families, and the memories we made. So if you came here to sell something, you came to the wrong place." The patio erupted in applause, not wild cheering, but a soft, knowing wave of claps that said more than words ever could. Tom's face burned red in the glow of the string lights. For once, he had no clever comeback, no flashy pitch. He just stood there, shrinking smaller by the second. And then, with a muttered whatever, he turned and stumbled off toward the driveway, disappearing into the night. The moment Tom's figure disappeared down the driveway, it was as if a weight lifted off the reunion. The tension that had hovered over the patio dissolved, replaced by laughter, chatter, and that easy comfort that only comes when you're surrounded by people who actually matter. John sat back down, and without missing a beat, grabbed another marshmallow skewer from the table and handed it to one of the kids running around. "Here," he said. "Make sure you roast it just enough so it's gooey, not burnt." The kid's eyes lit up, and within seconds, the fire pit was surrounded by giggling little ones holding sticks over the flames. Conversations picked up again, this time louder, freer. People started sharing old stories from high school. The pranks, the teachers we all secretly admired, the embarrassing moments that had turned legendary with time. And for every story, there was laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional good-natured groan from someone whose embarrassing tale had resurfaced. I couldn't help but notice how John carried himself through all of it. Not once did he bring up his business, his success, or even his name on the STEM Center. He didn't have to. His presence, his generosity, and the way he redirected the spotlight onto others spoke louder than any brag ever could. At one point, John leaned over to me with a quiet smile. "You know," he said, "the best part of nights like this isn't remembering who we were. It's seeing who we've become." And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about all of us, the kids we had been and the adults we'd grown into. The reunion, which had threatened to derail into awkwardness, had found its rhythm again. And this time, it wasn't just a party. It felt like a celebration of resilience, growth, and the simple joy of reconnecting. As the night stretched on, there was this unspoken bond that seemed to settle over the group. It wasn't about who was most successful, who had the biggest house, or who could brag the loudest. It was about shared history, those 4 strange, formative years we'd all gone through together, and the strange comfort of realizing we'd survived it and come out the other side. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling. Couples danced barefoot on the grass to some classic 90s track that someone had thrown on the speakers. Kids chased each other between the chairs with glow sticks, squealing with laughter. And around the patio, groups formed and reformed, telling stories that jumped from past to present seamlessly. And Tom? He was nowhere to be seen. His absence wasn't mourned. It was almost as if his shadow had been erased the moment John refused to acknowledge him. No one went looking for him, no one asked where he'd gone. In fact, the few times his name came up, it was only with a quick shake of the head and a change of subject. It struck me how poetic it all was. For years, Tom had tried to puff himself up, make himself larger than life, force people to see him. Yet, in the one place where he should have been remembered, he wasn't. John's dismissal wasn't cruel. It was simply the truth. Tom had failed to leave an impression worth keeping. Later, when we all gathered for a big group photo on the lawn, John stood in the middle, kids clinging to his arms, friends laughing on either side. And there, in the glow of string lights with cameras flashing, it was clear. This was the real legacy. Not the fake hustles, not the social media self-promotion, but the community you build and the people who are glad to stand beside you. For the first time in years, it felt like our class wasn't just remembering high school, it was redefining what it meant to belong. By the time the last of the guests began to drift away, the barn lights glowing faintly against the night sky, I found myself sitting back in my chair, a drink in hand, watching John say goodbye to people one by one. He wasn't just shaking hands. He was listening, laughing, asking about their kids, and genuinely caring. That was the difference. Tom's exit had been dramatic for him, but insignificant for everyone else. He had built his life around demanding attention, and yet here, in the one place where true recognition mattered, he had been reduced to nothing more than a passing shadow. Forgotten not out of spite, but because he had given no one a reason to remember him kindly. John, on the other hand, had never asked to be the center of anything. He built, he gave, he showed up for people, and because of that, the community naturally revolved around him. It wasn't about money or success. It was about legacy, about leaving people better than you found them. As we loaded the last chairs into the barn, John leaned over with a grin and said, "Funny, isn't it? Some people spend their whole lives trying to be memorable. Turns out the easiest way is just to be decent." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a reunion story. It was a life lesson. People may forget your accomplishments, your titles, your schemes, even your name, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Tom had left people rolling their eyes. John had left people smiling. And as we pulled out of the driveway under the September stars, it was clear who would truly be remembered long after we were all gone.